Ladies and gentlemen, coming back. It's daily number 542, where we learn to be a better gamer. In this segment, what we're going to do is step right on in and check out this neato bandito little game between ROOTCatZ and the enemy known as Desperon. And we're going to briefly, once again, examine this idea of using the swarm hosts in combination with infestors as a little defensive tool, utilizing the burrowness of both of them to stretch him a little bit thin on his detection, and as a result allow us to get a little bit more expanding done than we might ordinarily be able to. And most importantly of all, we get to see the utility of this really, really cool Nidus network plus swarm host usage. So again, as we blast on through this, we're saying things like, alright, in about 15 seconds, I'm really going to need to start worrying about things like Reapers coming to hit me. I could even do a little poke at his front and see if he built a Marine or not. That's always a very useful bit of information. Generally 305 is about when a Marine will pop out, so if you see no Marine, excellent, you now have good knowledge. 2 queens popping out, as we're managing all our possibilities of what Terran can be throwing at us. We're still noting that the early quad queen can cover pretty much most things. A little bit more leery of going for a third base now, as many Zergs have in the past. In Wings of Liberty, they go for a third base. Startail Life does this with almost no defense. However, the Widowmine plus Hellbat is becoming such a bitch that, as we saw, Cat's a little leery of doing that sort of thing. Alright, so we have the usual sort of problems. Oh my gosh, Hellion run-bys. Now this still exists in Wings of Liberty. Or excuse me, still exists in Heart of the Swarm. So that ended up being a pretty slight loss of the defense. But that's fine. We're Zerg, we can still have a 15 drone lead. The earlier those Hellion run-bys do, or in other words, the earlier the Hellion run-bys happen, the less damage they actually... man, come on, brain. The earlier the Hellion run-bys happen, the more damage the Hellions have to do, because Terran sacrificed an early command center to be able to do that early attack. So he's already screwing over his own economy to do that. So, if Hellions get in your base and you kill them off and lose a good amount of drones because they came so early, that's fine. You're still doing fine. But yeah, we see the early Ling Carapace. Standard goodness, spreading the creep. Everything's pretty much as expected. And now at the 9-minute mark, we have to say to ourselves, uh-oh, there can be some timing pushes starting to pop up. This is a little bit annoying. Another Hellion run-by ends up happening. This, no matter what, is mech. Just straight up. In fact, he probably has to have 2 reactors, or at the very least 2 factories worth of stuff. Indeed, we see Factory 2 out already. Do-do-do-do. Oops, not Desperon cam. So again, this is stuff that will happen, Wings of Liberty or Heart of the Swarm. Sure, they got in there, sure they killed off a lot, but again, go to the Units Lost tab. It's not as atrocious as you might believe. 24 drones killed off, but of course we have killed off 13 Hellions in the course of everything. So we do see that, yet again, going straight for the pathogen glands, because it's going to be difficult to hold off things with just straight swarm hosts. Is a pretty typical type of expectation. This is also very annoying to have this go down. However, because we saw that many Hellions, we're almost certain that it's mech. A nice transition into missile attacks, preparing up. Now, despite the fact that we have gotten pathogen glands, it doesn't mean that we have to get the infestors. Seeing mech doesn't necessarily mean that we're just going to go into autopilot. So, I like this nice little attempt to go for this Nidus network harassment. As most Terrans are going to be curled up into their main base, most meching players are just muling their heart out, and now meching players have ways to burn their money instead of just building more and more orbital commands. So we have this mass expand, and then we have this Nidus network plus swarm host combo that is going to be very easy to execute. And in fact, a Nidus network right here is pretty easy to pull off, and deals very well with players that are going to be going for mines. Now, I do want to pause for a brief moment just to emphasize, if any of you are having trouble still holding stuff off that's new and hard to swarm, that's fine. We've seen ZvT struggle with this, and ZvT is one of the top-ranked players in Heart of the Swarm. In fact, every top-ranked player in Heart of the Swarm of every race has trouble with all the new stuff because it's new stuff. The goal of this thing that we're looking at is, again, not the specific build order. Not, oh, I guess I need to open up Zerglings to hold it off. Conceptually, we're seeing that this sort of stuff integrates nicely at this point in time. We might want to open up roaches with increasing frequency. And in fact, in some of the later games, we're going to see that ZvT's openings is a lot more smooth over time, since these are some of the earlier games. But still, this is a nice chance to do this sort of annoying harassment that is going to be really difficult for a mech player to deal with. And we can just throw out a bunch of locusts like this, throw out the fungal growth to delay, and then unburrow and retreat. And while all this is going on, expanding, getting these bases up, there is a moment here where ZvT opts to do a retreat, but whiffs, and ends up losing the Nidus network. Which is, of course, not ideal. Of course, you would want to get out before then, but still, the same logic applies. You just run out, and in the meantime, even with the failure of this attack, we see that there's been this clean opportunity to begin populating all these bases. But here's another interesting moment. What we've seen is that there was this period from around 11 to around 14 where we can use these swarm hosts to launch little assaults, to maybe provide a light contain outside the front. And then after that period, we see ZvT trying to construct himself some swarm hosts to do essentially a straight defense. There's not really any direct pressure that's being applied to Terran until starting maybe right around now. But the problem is, without any backup, without things like fungal growths to delay these, without Zerglings or anything else, swarm hosts do not function anything remotely close to the way that infestors do, where they can sort of hold their own and delay attacks indefinitely. Swarm hosts are much more of a... they seem a lot better as the strong offensive tool, and defensively they need a lot of associated help to be able to stay alive. In this point in time, we see ZvT still just trying to run with the experiment of what happens if we just keep making lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of swarm hosts. What if we just continue to churn those out? What ends up being the net result? And we see that even a meching player, with his considered to be terrible mobility, just runs right past all these swarm hosts. Which I think is a fairly critical thing to note. Only when ZvT goes, you know what, let me just pull back and start building a lot of roaches out of all my hatcheries, does he actually start to be able to defend. And this is something that is an important revelation to see in action. That the swarm host, with this little assault down here, gave Terran a lot of annoying trouble. If these swarm hosts were to have been able to pull back into this Nidus network. I whiffed it. If the, alright, I whiffed it again. There we go. If these swarm hosts were able to pull back into the Nidus network and then reburrow here and begin poking at the front, it would have been amazing and would have bought so much time. That swarm host has a great use in that early period, that 11 to 14 period, as messing with our opponent who is low on detection. But here he just runs away straight up. So I'm now going to close this replay and hope that it doesn't crash my encoder. Alright, here we go. Alright. Good. It did crash it. But it seems to be stabilizing. Cool. So, I now want to switch gears a little bit, because what we've gotten the chance to do thus far is we've gotten the chance to see the swarm host working, and we've gotten to see it not so working. It works particularly well with these Nidus networks against Terran. It works particularly well in a post-timing attack period, in sort of 11 to 14, where the Terran player really doesn't have a lot of ordinary timings planned. And against mech, we can do some Nidus network poking, even in the main base. Against non-mech, we can do outside of the base Nidus networking, or literally just walk there, throw some locusts, unburrow, and move elsewhere. What I want to do is talk a little bit about the Viper as a really slick little unit. The Viper does something... Oh, where is this game? This game is so beautifully executed by ZvT. Where is this game? So, the Viper works very, very nicely with a lot of the layer tech. Roach Hydra. What's one of the reasons why people don't go Roach Hydra against Protoss, or don't go Roach Hydra against Terran? The big answer is that it doesn't transition well to Hive. I think everyone has learned the painful lesson of maxing out on roaches against Protoss. And then you just run into a bunch of force fields and Colossus Immortal Stalker, and you die. And that's why we've landed on Zergling Infestor mid-games, because it does transition so beautifully up to Hive, so beautifully up to getting the Greater Spire tech. But here what we're going to see is that, the Viper makes that that composition in the mid-game, that Roach Hydra composition, work really nicely. It actually works fantastically. Roach Hydra works fantastically with the Viper. So what this means now is that we used to have to say things like, okay, how do I hold that attack off? Well, I can't use Hydralisks because those suck when I get to Hive. We don't even have to say that anymore. We can actually use that sort of stuff. So we're now going to watch 2 games of the Roach popping up in the mid-game as a solid tool, and then the Viper allowing us to transition up to Hive. We're going to go swiftly through the opening game, because, as you'll note, Zerg does not have the Viper happening in the opening game. But as this opening unfolds, we're going to note all the things that we're worrying about, and all the ways in which this is linking together nicely. Because it's not just, can we get the Viper? It's the way in which we get the Viper and the way in which we pull back to that Roach transition. So certainly we're going to see not 1, not 2, but multiple queens. Here is... the third queen is up there, getting produced. We now have the early extractors coming up. When those 2 finish, ZvT builds 2 more. These are pretty common ways to get 4 geysers up early as Zerg. Let's just go ahead and go to the ZvT cam. ZvT spends his first gas getting layer, his next gas getting pool, his next gas getting upgrades, and he spreads creep like a boss. He's starting to get worried about things like Widow Mines. As a result, we're starting to see some Overlords poaching the front, Overlords checking the back, spreading the creep out, getting these 1-1 upgrades as expected. Not venturing too far out because all Terrans are trying to bait nowadays. Early burrow tech, great. Early infestor usage, great. We want to start going for the infestor Zergling with the burrow, so that way we can begin stretching him thin on detection early on. And of course, given this map, Howling Peaks has this big wide open back area, we can easily do these types of harassments and know that this front bunker is going to have problems defending it, even if this is walled off at the back. So yeah, there's the pathogen glands thingy coming up. We saw Widow Mines, so this is an interesting adjustment we're seeing. Widow Mines yield us to get Overlord speed, so that way we can have the Overlords sort of march right on in, sacrifice themselves to pick up 2 mine shots. Pretty easy. And this Terran is doing this weird as hell Widow Mine Viking combination thing to kill off Overseers and to try to pick off Queens, and it seems pretty cool looking. However, ZvT literally just builds the Overseer, walks right on in, and kills it all off, even with the Vikings. Nice. And we still see that KatZ is in this fantastic position, where now he is going, or he has 3 bases, he has Infestors up, he's gotten to do a little bit of poking into the main base, he sees a lot of Vikings, he sees a lot of Widow Mines, he says, aha, you're probably going for mech, so I'll begin getting those upgrades. And then we see the Roach Warren pop right on up. And per usual, these Infestors are amazing defensively against drops. We're not having the struggles that we would have was our opponent to do something like go for... were we to do something like go for Swarm Host. We don't have any of said issues. And now we even have Roaches to be a little bit beefier of a defense in this situation. So, of course, nothing wrong with continuing to stock up on the Infestors. Why? Because our opponent is being aggressive. We're continuing to see mech. Easy peasy, going straight for more Roaches. Now, the interesting transition we're seeing out of KatZ right now is the Hydralisk Den concurrent with the Hive. In other words, KatZ is not having to have the very slow, very... I'm trying to think of another word than slow. Slow really encapsulates everything. Going for Hive and getting Ultras or Broodlords is slow. We have to do it one step at a time. First get the Hive, and then get the Greater Spire, and then build the Broodlords. But we can sort of multi-core. We can go for the Hydralisk Den tech while we're going for the Viper tech out of the Hive. Also, this 4th base, and soon enough a 5th base, is a real bad idea if we want to be doing something like going for Broodlords, or if we want to be going for Ultralisks. However, it works amazingly if we're going Roach Hydra, because that's a super mobile army. And again, it's a great idea to make Infestors if your opponent is going harassment heavy. Because we can do that, and we can gobble up all the experience points. So I'm watching this mainly from KatZ's point of view to reveal how we can go very quickly from defense suddenly into offense. Here's the Hydralisk popping up. We're not going to get the muscular augments yet. We're going to be getting Groove Spines first because, again, we're a little bit in defense mode. We're getting these Vipers up. And look at this. Expand. Expand, ordinarily considered to be a very unwise idea if you're going for Hive Tech, because Broodlords end up being not so great against dealing with that. Look at this Terran player expanding everywhere, having himself this rock-solid defense. It could be a little bit rock-her solid. He just messed up on his macro early, which is, not too essential. Here's the big one. It's hard to get tanks if you have 2 in gas. But still, he has a reasonable enough defense. And then, boom, the instant we get our Hive up, pop out some Vipers, suck up some resources, and whereas most Zerg buddies have to worry about this sort of slow, how do I defend all the fronts kind of attacks, we can rush up here, defend this easily, head right back to middle, join up with the Vipers, speeding it up, and mount these sorts of super aggressive assaults. Notice how we saw massive stuttering because I was at ×8 speed. Notice how we saw these infested swarm eggs get thrown out. That's to absorb tank fire and to get a sense of where the tanks are positioned. Once KatZ does that, it's fairly straightforward to simply walk up with the Vipers and turn our mid-game army of not a ton of Hydralisk Roach into a really brutal to deal with army because the tanks have 0 range! Yeah. And then we can fungal growth anything that tries to unsiege, and with a very small amount of units, we can just roll right through. This is not a huge force that we just saw out of KatZ. This is not the classic style of Zerg that has 10k, 10k in army value. The Broodlord Infestor Death Force that's unstoppable. This is just a very easy, straightforward little defense. The Terran player's trying to be bold with his Vikings and kill off other things, but Nidus Networks also linking these bases together. KatZ is building swarm hosts, which don't really matter to me because he's already won with the Viper. So, yeah, rockin'. You know, I do have to go to metadating in a moment, so what I'm actually going to do is we're going to have a 2-part daily, so that way I can rush on. Stupid Heart of the Swarm. Crashing me. So we're going to do a 2-part daily, and I'm just going to breeze through one more game really fast here. The best game of them all. Where what I want to look at is this usage of Roach Infestor in the mid-game, and then transitioning up to Viper. There will be no part 3. This is actually going to wrap up the daily, and apologies for not having questions. Just post them in the forums. But this is a game between KatZ and Dragon. Dragon's considered by most to be the best Terran in Heart of the Swarm right now. But KatZ opens up with a pool first, which again, feel free to experiment with these sorts of things. There's no clear rule on whether this is better or worse, because right now early Reaper play is becoming so popular that people are saying, you know what, I may as well go for an early Queen to shut down this very early Reaper. And as we can see, it does. There's really not that much that Dragon can do about it. Speeding right along. Again, why would we not go for a Roach Infestor mid-game in Wings of Liberty? Well, because if we did that, then we have no real good transition up to a Hive. We see a really rock-solid defense from Dragon. KatZ tries to do a kind of standard Baneling bust. And then he's going to begin teching. And begin roaching. Because we have that Viper that we can fall back on, even knowing that his opponent is going for Marine Marauder. He saw it with the Engineering Bay. We see the early third. We see going straight for the Roaches. We see this combination of some Infestors and Roaches, something we have not seen in a really long time. Just a straight Roach Infestor mid-game in this matchup. Seems very Wings of Liberty-esque. Speeding it up. Speeding it up. Got another show coming up. Yeah, here's a big money part. Alright, even with that good old projectile fungal, a fungal's a fungal. It's good. This is why the Infestors are a little bit better defensively. Obviously, with a little bit of extra minerals, we're seeing KatZ toss out some of them good old mineral-based defenses, and then overrunning the front with Roaches in a manner that's looking a lot like the way Stefano's been doing it. But again, the Roach Infestor force, traditionally defensive, now we actually get to throw down some of these Vipers. And we're seeing KatZ do as much damage as he can, which incidentally winds up being a pretty good amount, having killed off 30 workers. And now we're seeing this really rad Viper Roach Hydra force with Infestor. Any siege tanks, no problem. We're going to blinding cloud them. The overaggression from KatZ ended up costing him a base, but, you know, that's fine. He's just going to be building up a huge force. And if the medevacs try to run, he can abduct them. Tried to abduct the tanks, but misclicked a little bit. Mid-game force that's normally defensive finally gets to be aggressive. And of course, with a more mobile, aggressive force, we obviously get the opportunity to expand behind it. But coming up, with KatZ being in total control, another interesting moment ends up happening. What's the huge problem that you always have with Broodlord Infestor? Like, literally, I want you to ask yourself, what's the biggest problem with a Broodlord Infestor? The answer is getting Broodlord Infestor. Look at cats, coming every which way, having these Vipers be able to just disable packs of tanks pretty easily. Hello, Mr. Viper. And at one point here, cats, if I can find the Greater Spire, I'll be speeding it up. Cats begins to transition out of this mid-game force. Transitioning out of this mid-game force is the huge, difficult part. Cats even tries to mount this big offensive play that winds up actually being pretty gosh darn great. Trying to do a blinding cloud on some of these Marine Marauder medevac. This is going well, right? This is going excellently. We've even cut back in and kill off this base. Alright, fantastic. So far so good. You know, maybe lost one of these. But it's this transition. Okay, look, now starting to go for the Broodlord Infestor force. This is where cats begins to lose hold over the game. This is going to function the exact same way as we would see someone who didn't build enough Ling Infestor in the mid-game. They're going for the Broodlords. This attack was not a huge loss for cats. It was kind of a weird tradey exchange because we were seeing such a hard battle for Dragon to get this base. But suddenly, after this attack is done, this expansion formation setup is an expansion formation setup that needs a fast mobile army to be able to defend it. And if we're transitioning to Broodlord Infestor, come on, I'm clicking on you, little spire. Why is it not zooming to it? Dang. Because of this transition, this is what's suddenly making cats really immobile, trying to run up here, defend this base. Can't run back here to defend that base. And because I'm low on time, I actually just have to wrap up. What's significant about this game is that it demonstrated the potential of the Viper to level up this force of mid-game Roach Infestor and then Roach Hydra Infestor into something that could continue into the Hive tech, where you could get the +3 upgrades, you can Blinding Cloud and hit from different angles. Hell, even the speed upgrade for the Hydralisks contributes to this as well. But with all these expansions cropping up, there needs to be more time put into the defense before the transition to Broodlords. So the way I'd almost sum up the thought process of Broodlords is that it's no longer the sharp, straightforward transitions the way that we would think of it before. The sort of like, alright, I will now go Ling Infestor, and now I'm going to get my Hive, and then I'm just going to hold off, and then at 17 minutes I have Broodlords. Now it's a lot more of, okay, how many expansions do I have right now? Does that mean that I can begin going for Broodlords now? You have to do a lot more looking at the game, a lot more seeing what the setup of bases are. But the fortunate thing is that we have this nice tool in the Viper to be able to open up a lot more possibilities in there. I think that's it. I think I blasted through that as quickly as I could. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, because I will now be doing Meta Dating Episode 6, where we're going to be playing Katwa Shouju, Part 2. I'll be tweeting a link very soon, and I hope to see you there. So, for now, I'm gone. Bye. Sorry for the swift outro.